Hello again, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each week we bring you a new interview with one of Hollywood's top directors conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/The Director's Cut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Todd Haynes' film, Carol. Based on the Patricia Highsmith novel entitled The Price of Salt, the adaptation follows the love affair between the unhappily married Carol and young department store clerk Therese. As Carol seeks to free herself from the shackles of her marriage, her husband begins to question her competence as a mother after her new relationship comes to light. The critically acclaimed drama received 6 Academy Award nominations this year, including Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress nods for stars Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara, and a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination for screenwriter Phyllis Nagy. Following the Los Angeles screening of Carol, Mr. Haynes spoke with director Kelly Reichardt about making the film, the decision behind casting Blanchett and Mara in the lead roles, and much more. Listen on for highlights from their conversation, recorded in November at the DGA Theater.
Hi, Todd.
Hi, Kel. Thank you for doing this, Kelly.
Sure. Gosh. I'll just get us started and then we'll see if you all have some questions. I was just working with Leslie Schatz today, who is the sound designer on the film. And I was asking Leslie, what should I ask Todd first? And he said, ask him, Todd, why are you so great? I said, okay, Todd. So I was trying to think of questions I don't know the answer to. And I guess I was wondering, when you first read The Price of Salt, did you read it in your youth?
No, I didn't read it until it came to me. I didn't know about it.
Oh.
And I'd heard about the project from Sandy Powell, probably maybe a year or less before they were looking for a director for it again. And I don't really know about the whole backstory of the movie, except that I knew that Cate Blanchett was attached. Sandy Powell is the costume designer, and I worked with her twice before Carol. And she mentioned this project, and she said it was based on a Patricia Highsmith novel, her second novel, which was a lesbian love story, and I didn't know that even existed. But it all came to me around May of 2013. Phyllis Nagy's script where it was at that stage, and the novel. And I went and took it all to the Oregon coast. I live in Portland, and I think I read the novel first, and then I read the script. But since Cate was attached, I was just seeing Carol already, of course. You know, how could you not?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it seemed like it seems like a book you could have read before making many of your films, right? So is Price of Salt, does it have a meaning, or is it, what's the code in there?
You mean the title?
Yeah. How did the lesbians know to go read this book? I mean, am I allowed to ask that question? Was it just a nonsense, title?
No, I think, there's a little bit of dispute. Phyllis says that it refers to, Lot's wife, and the suggestion that we should not look back, but we move forward. But I had also read, maybe in one of the biographies of Patricia Highsmith, that salt refers in some way in the book. There might be a passage in the book. It's very elusive. It's not spelled out, to just flavor, like, which sounds almost sort of reductive in a way, because there's so much more at stake than just flavor. But it's, the price of flavor in your life, or the cost of having a full life, basically, I think is suggested by the title. But I think lesbians just, there was limited lesbian fiction available at the time, and this was printed, ultimately published by a small press under a pseudonym. She shopped it around with her normal publisher, Harper's, but they didn't want to no one would touch it. And so she agreed to publish it under another name, Claire Morgan. And it stayed a very well-known and very well-loved piece of lesbian fiction until the 1980s, when Patricia Highsmith published it under her own name before she passed away. And I think it was called Carol when it came out again. Yeah.
I did see that. But it must have been reviewed so that people would know what it was all about, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think they talked about it, and it was distinguished by the fact that it had this ending that was not a typical ending for a piece of lesbian fiction. Even relatively underground fiction, they usually had to have a punishing ending where the characters were their behavior was corrected, or somebody kills themselves or is sent to a sanitarium or whatever the case. And this had a very different kind of ending.
Well, I remember when you were shooting, and I was lucky enough to watch dailies, talking to you on the phone and thinking like, Todd, no one's going to forgive her that mink coat, even maybe more than that she left her daughter. Like you have to be careful about the mink coat. and I guess it really, and then I don't know, the scenes get put together, and this how Kate plays the character with all this poise next to Rooney's rawness, or Therese's rawness. It really had to be that way, but it is like a brave thing on the part of you and Kate, I think, to just sort of plow ahead with this. It's a big idea to leave your kid behind, and her sort of being wrapped in the wealth of her situation. And but did you question it along the way, or you just stayed the course?
Do you mean literally the scene where she's leaving the lawyer's office, or do you just mean throughout as a general?
No, in the lawyer's office, she's not wearing the mink.
She is not, exactly.
She's wearing that other coat. No, throughout, just the whole idea of not letting her sort of be that person that's not easy to get to and not easy to side with necessarily.
Right.
I ultimately do when the movie's put together, but when seeing it in parts, I didn't know that I would. But
right.
You were very steadfast in it, and I'm just wondering, like, when you're in the thick of it, did you and Kate? Did you guys have those fears about her, or you just sort of keep on?
Well, I think one thing that's, I think, an important thing to try to dispense with, and we did, is that they don't have to be necessarily well-liked, these women. For you to feel for them, for you to care about them, and for you to grapple yourself with the situation, the particular historical moment that they find themselves in, and this complicated desire that they have, and how they're going to express it. And I really admire, I think both, I have to say this is something that draws me to a lot of the actors I've worked with over the years, and it's absolutely true for Rooney and Kate, is likability is not a motivating force in the roles that they play. And so they will risk, difficult and, situations, outcomes, but even more than that, I think a lack of accessibility to the viewer, which both of them navigate in this film in very interesting ways, because they never really tell you, we never get all warm and fuzzy with these characters. There's a distance that's maintained, and there's a distance that's navigated from who is really in the more vulnerable position in love, and maybe even the more amorous position in love, and that throughout much of the film, that is Therese. And that changes toward the end of the film. But I still feel, and we talked about this a lot, that we bring a certain new era of parenting kind of assumptions about what good parenting is. and to this period that I think might have been that was just different about what we think parents should do and how much they sacrifice for their kids. And I think it's a really, really complicated situation. I think Carol, at that point in the story, saying that Harge should maintain custody, is also saying, but the condition of that is that I get access to my daughter on my own terms when I want it. And if you don't give me that, I'll take you to court. And the status, your social standing, your power, your dominance are all at risk as a result.
And Kyle Chandler does so much with his body and his face throughout the movie, with such an economy of dialogue on his part. I'm not sure exactly how to frame the question, but I'm as you know, a big admirer of just how your films are constructed, and the sort of just the way the actors move through a frame, and the way the frame itself works with the sound design, and how you're able to get across so much through just the filmmaking and visually and sonically. And could you just talk a little bit about how your process of getting to that, in this case with Ed Luckman probably some of the time, and
well, this was a very different, this kind of had a language of its own, Carol, that was people ask me about Far From Heaven, a film I made that Ed also shot, the first film of mine that Ed shot, that also was set in the 1950s, also deals with a homosexual relationship and a marriage and its repercussions. But they, in terms of language, cinematic language and style, they really, I find, are such distinct and different films. And that one really was very consciously quoting and looking at the language of movies from the 50s, particularly Douglas Sirk, and particularly the sort of high point of the domestic melodrama. And this one, we really were looking other places. I think partly it started with that novel. And the whole question of point of view, the whole question of who is looking at who, so that whole idea of framing, setting up so many frames through glass, through windows, through reflections, maybe at some level we hoped, making you consider the act of looking as something that is not always uncomplicated or rooted in desire, the desire to kind of get through that filter or that reflection or that blockade or whatever it is. So we looked at photography from the period. We looked more at the kind of almost soiled palette of the color process at this time, early 50s New York City, the color process itself that was really distinct and interesting. And a lot of filmmakers, like some people may know the work of Saul Leiter, who was a mid-century New York-based photographer with a great sense of the abstract, a tendency toward shooting through glass and windows, but also a lot of really amazing women. I didn't really know this until I got into the research, who were behind the lens of the camera as well, doing photojournalism and art photography. People like Ruth Orkin, Helen Levitt, Esther Bubbly, and Vivian Meyer, somebody who whose work has been more recently discovered.
These are wives of great photographers?
These are the women way behind the men. No, they were really, in fact, Ruth Orkin is such an interesting case because she did have a male partner, Morris Engel, who was yes. Partners. Well, they were married, and I met their daughter the other night.
Wow.
And they made docudramas together. The best known is probably a film called Little Fugitive from 1954 or 53, about a little boy who runs off to Coney Island. And they used some semi-actors, but mostly real people, real locations, natural light, shooting around New York City. And there was one called Lovers and Lollipops that we looked at for Carol because the locations were more relevant to this story. And, but they were a team, and they get co-directing credit for those films, which I didn't know either.
It's because they're called the Morse Ingle films. That's why you didn't know.
That is why.
So should we see if you all have some questions for Todd? Yes. I'll just repeat your questions so we can. Hi. How do you work with your actors, Todd?
It depends on the film, the schedule, and the actor. But in this case, we had the time. We built the time in. Both Kate and Rooney love to rehearse and spend time together around the table, going through the scenes, talking about the material. We had Sarah Paulson and Kyle around, Jake Lacey, who plays Richard, Teresa's boyfriend. And it was so great. I love this. And there are some actors I've worked with who don't like to rehearse. And sometimes I have to kind of trick them into it and say, we're doing a blocking rehearsal, or I just want to see, we'll block some stuff out on the set and see what it looks like. But Kate and Rooney really, really enjoyed it. And what was interesting is I think this process of eliminating language and dialogue that was not necessary, which sort of started with my working with Phyllis on the script, continued in the rehearsal process with the actors. And I would almost be amazed when Rooney would say, "Does she really need to say this? Wouldn't it be more potent if it was somehow not said?" And that it isn't always what you think of actors, going for, but they did. And that same process, I think, continued all the way through to the scoring of the film with Carter Burwell, where the simpler themes he came up with carried more emotional, had a stronger impact, I think, in the end. And we all sort of felt that way. It was nice that we felt we were sort of on the same page.
Oh, which city did you shoot in for the 50s? Yeah.
Proudly, I love, putting out the word. We shot the film in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was such a great experience. It was really I'd visited Cincinnati in the early 90s, so it had been a long, long time. But it's a city that really had architectural integrity intact. It had the kind of tired blocks. We literally shot some scenes in Carol with existing signage for early 50s New York. I mean, Judy Becker, the production designer, and I were like, wow, this is such a special place. The extras were lovely. The day players were really terrific. So it was a great experience. Oh,
yeah, there's so many great faces throughout the film. Nobody feels extra ever. Everybody just feels so part of
you
it.
don't always
really
expect it. I'm sure many people have worked with union extras in LA or New York, and they're seasoned and experienced, but these people were so comfortable in their skin. It was really great.
The questions about where you got the cars for the movie.
They came from wherever we could get them. I mean, we had a limited budget. We had great prop people on the film. And we just did the very best with the resources that we had. And so there are car collectors in Ohio, and Cleveland maybe probably had a bigger, I forget exactly where the bulk of them came, but they were great. And with a film like this, you get period cars and they come to you in perfect condition, all shiny, clean. And we had to kind of gently distress them so they looked more real and spattered with rain and dust and stuff like that. But
Rooney is reminding him of Audrey Hepburn. Is that intentional?
Yes, it comes up a lot. It was not an intentional thing. Personally, I think of Gene Simmons even more than Audrey Hepburn at times with her. If I had to pick somebody, she's a little less well known today than Audrey Hepburn. But, Rooney transforms as Therese through the course of the film, and her more poised and mature look that bookends the structure, definitely have that elegance, her gorgeous neck and the shorter cut and all of that. But it was really about watching that change and watching her mature and sort of grow up in front of our eyes as a character.
Interesting. He's wondering about the photographs that appear in the film, and were those taken specifically? Who took those? Where'd they come from?
The shots of Kate that Therese, the shots of Carol that Therese takes were shot by our stills photographer. Although I think we had him use 35 film for them. But interestingly, Ed Lockman had spent a semester in a college in Ohio in the early 70s, I think. And he had a sort of a mentor figure who was a photographer. I don't remember if he was a teacher at the school. I think it was Aurora College, but I might have it wrong. It was a small college. And he tracked this guy down, and this guy came to us in Cincinnati with all of this unexposed film. So it was sort of like our own Vivian Maier collection of stuff that had never been printed before. And a lot of it it wasn't exactly it wasn't as early as the exact years of Carol. It was like the early 60s though. So it was some pretty rare finds that we were able to use. So yeah, that was a kind of fortuitous, connection. Yeah.
All right. I'm rewording that just for simplicity, I guess. Because I kind of have something like that written down also, just the question of whose story it was, and did you start out with it being equally sort of flowing back and forth between Therese and Carol, or was it, as you were saying, like Carol's kind of the object of Therese's?
Yeah, to me it was always more Therese's story than Carol's. That Carol really was the object of desire. And again, the love stories that I looked at on film and the first one I thought of was Brief Encounter, the beautiful David Lean film from the 40s, which influenced a structural change in the script. And the reason Brief Encounter is the story of a married man and woman who meet and have a sort of fall in love, but it's not really consummated, but it disrupts their lives. The way the film starts is that very, very much like Carol, through the eyes of sort of secondary characters, and you find Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard in the background of a refreshment stand in a refreshment room in a train station. And you go, oh wow, aren't they the stars of the movie? And their conversation is interrupted by a gossiping character who recognizes Laura, the woman. And you realize something's been interrupted of some importance, but you don't know what it is. And we go home with Celia Johnson, and then her voiceover begins to come out when she sits opposite her husband, who turns on the radio and does the crossword puzzle. And the whole story is recounted. And we come back through the whole story to that same conversation. We understand its meaning. And what I loved about Brief Encounter, and among many things, is that it sort of sets up that question, whose story is this? And you finally learn that it's hers.
Are you ever alone with him?
With Trevor Howard?
Yeah. Are there scenes with, I can't remember.
I don't think you are. I think it's all conducted through her voiceover. So I don't think there's ever a scene that you're alone with him in. With Carol, yes, there are scenes that we're alone with Carol, but I still think we still want, like when we first gain access to Carol's world, it's when the gloves are sent back to her from Therese. And so we go with the mail truck into her world, and it inaugurates access to Carol. But for the most part, we're still kind of on the side of Therese, who's the vulnerable one, until their statuses change, I felt. What I thought was interesting is by the time you come back at the end of the film to that same conversation, Carol's the one who is coming to Therese with her heart on her sleeve, sort of stripped naked and asking for her love. And Therese says no. But it all sort of, to me, the real shift happens at that point toward the end of the film where Carol is in the cab looking out, and she sees Therese through the glass in the world occupying her life, and Therese doesn't see Carol. And at that point, you realize that something has really changed. And that's when Carol is literally on her way to the lawyer's office for that penultimate scene over custody.
How did the film come to you through Sandy Powell? And
it didn't come to me through Sandy. Sandy just told me that she said, I don't really know. I mean, I think because most of my films, all my films, until Carol, I've written and developed myself. And I've known Liz Carlson, the really hands-on producer of this film, for so many years, probably since the mid-'80s, and through Christine Vachon, my producer partner. And I think Liz probably Liz and Christine talk almost every day. So Liz always knew what I was working on and when and what scripts I was writing and da-da-da. This started like in 1997, I think. Phyllis Naj wrote the first adaptation of Carol that many years ago. And that was with a different producer before Liz Carlson came on board. So really the longest prehistory begins with the screenwriter. And the rights reverted back to the rights holder for Patricia Highsmith. Liz came back on board, kind of resurrected the rights, tried to pull Phyllis back into the process. Phyllis was resistant at first. And then Liz said, no, we have to make this movie, Phyllis. And if I don't do it with you, I'll do it with somebody else. Phyllis was like, okay. And I don't really know who the directors were that they went to at different stages. Kate got on board at a certain point. But Sandy and I did this appearance at the Museum of the Moving Image for my film Far From Heaven, and she'd been working with Scorsese on a bunch of films, and she said, I think I have a frock film coming up. And it was this. And but she said it was a lesbian love story that Liz is producing with Kate in the lead role. And I was like, that sounds good.
I remember you saying,
really?
I'm jealous of that project. Yeah. And then somehow, of course, it became yours. That's how it really works. But it is amazing that it doesn't feel like a project that's had a bunch of hands on it for as long as it's been around. And that's probably because it just Phyllis had was a through line for so long.
It did. I have to say the first draft of the script I read, I loved it. I thought it was beautifully done, but I also felt that thing that happens when things have been kicking around for a while and you're trying to appeal to financiers. There was something a little defanged about it. And when I talked to Phyllis, she was like, I said, there's a lot of tension in the book between the two women. And I really loved that. I thought it'd be really cool to get more of that back in the script. And she said, thank you. Because she felt she'd been sort of making it more congenial in the hopes of getting it financed over. And you can that happens and you can tell. So she kind of went back to some of her earlier instincts with the adaptation. And, she was pleased, I think. I think we had a good.
We have one more question. Should I,
As I've said at other Q&As.
Oh, yeah. Why don't you have any bullets in the gun?
It's a lesbian gun. Our idea was that it was jammed, but it's hard to read it that way. Yeah, I know. It kind of reads like it's not loaded. Same thing. Who'd be prepared. I mean, I think it's an afterthought that she brings it at all. It's really not a big plot point. And Harge has a sort of a vanity gun in the house in the book. And Carol just throws it into her suitcase, being two women alone on the road and not really knowing what they're facing and what the outcome is. It was sort of an afterthought. But as Chekhov says, when there's a gun in a film, you know it's going to, right? Mm-hmm. It has to fire.
Also, you being a big NRA person.
Exactly.
That you. Todd, thank you so much. It's a beautiful film.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks so much, you guys, for sticking around. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed listening. You can watch video of this and many other director Q&As on YouTube or on our website at dga.org/crafts/director-QA. If you're enjoying The Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes or our SoundCloud page so you won't miss an episode. Over the next few weeks, we will have episodes covering several more Oscar-nominated films, so be sure to check them out as they arrive. We hope you hear from us soon. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.